My husband of 45 years ended up in the emergency room with his pants around his ankles and his secret girlfriend screaming in the hospital parking lot. At 67 years old, I discovered that Charles wasn't just cheating on me. He learned the hard way not to mess with Helen Montgomery from Atlanta, Georgia. If you're new here, subscribe now, because this story will leave you speechless. Now, I'm not the type to air dirty laundry. My mama raised me better than that. But some stories need telling, especially when they might help another woman standing exactly where I stood last summer, wondering if the ache in her heart would ever stop. I've lived in the same brick ranch house on Peachtree Drive for nearly 4 decades. Our neighborhood is the kind where folks still bring casseroles when someone's sick, and everyone knows whose hydrangeas won at the garden club last spring. Mine did, by the way, 3 years running. Charles and I moved here right after our wedding back in '79. He was handsome then, tall with that salt and pepper hair that made all the church ladies fan themselves during Sunday service. We raised our son Michael here, watched him grow up and move to California with his fancy computer job. These days, it's just me, my cat Biscuit, and until recently, the man I thought would be by my side until the good Lord called us home. That summer day started like any other. The Georgia heat was pressing down like a hot iron, making the asphalt shimmer and the cicadas scream from every tree. I was making sweet tea in the kitchen, the kind with so much sugar it makes your teeth hurt, when Charles announced he needed to run some errands. Nothing unusual there. Every Saturday, he'd take his pride and joy, that cherry-red 1969 Chevy Impala, out for what he called old man time. Usually meant the hardware store, maybe a stop at Jim's barbershop for a trim, and all the gossip our little corner of Atlanta could produce. "Don't wait lunch on me, Helly," he said, jingling his keys. Charles is the only person who's ever called me Helly. I used to think it was sweet. "Might swing by Danny's to look at that fishing gear he's selling." I nodded, wiping my hands on my apron. "Take your time," I said. "I've got my book club ladies coming over at 4. He kissed my cheek, quick, distracted, and I heard the screen door slam behind him. I should have known something was wrong right then. Saturday was always our day. For decades, we'd have lunch together on the back porch, watching the hummingbirds fight over my feeders. But the signs had been there for months. Late nights, new cologne, mysterious phone calls where he'd step outside to answer. I just hadn't wanted to see them. The truth is, when you've been married as long as I had, you develop a kind of blindness. You stop really looking at the person across the breakfast table. You stop wondering where they go when they're not with you. It's not that you don't care. It's that trust becomes a habit, like making coffee first thing in the morning or checking the locks before bed. It wasn't until I realized I'd forgotten to give Charles his blood pressure pills that everything changed. The doctor had been clear. Skip a day, and his pressure would spike something fierce. That man is stubborn as a mule about his medication. So I grabbed the little orange bottle and headed out to the garage, thinking I'd catch him before he left the neighborhood. But his car was gone. I stood there in that empty garage, feeling the heat press in around me, wondering if I should call his cell. Then I noticed something strange. Charles's fishing tackle wasn't in its usual spot by the workbench. If he was going to Danny's to look at fishing gear, why would he take his own? That's when I remembered he'd been complaining about the Chevy's glove compartment sticking. He kept his spare car key there, and if he couldn't get to it in an emergency, well, that just wouldn't do. I had my own key on my ring. I could fix it before he got back. A small kindness in a marriage full of them. I walked down our driveway and across the street to Mrs. Abernathy's house, where Charles always parked his precious car when he wasn't using it. "Too much sun in our driveway," he'd explain. "Ruins the paint job." Doris Abernathy never minded. She's been sweet on Charles since we moved in, though she thinks I don't notice. The Chevy sat in her carport, gleaming like a fresh-picked cherry. I ran my hand over the warm hood as I walked around to the passenger side. Even after all these years, I could appreciate why Charles loved this car so much. It was a beauty, all right. Pristine leather seats, chrome detailing that sparkled in the sunlight. That new car smell he somehow managed to maintain decade after decade. I slid the key into the passenger door and opened it, feeling the blast of hot air hit my face. The leather was scorching to the touch, but I leaned in anyway, popping open the glove compartment with a firm tug. It wasn't sticking at all. That was my first clue. The second was what tumbled out onto the passenger seat. A small, square package, and then another, and another. 5 of them, to be exact. 5 unopened condoms lying there on the cream-colored leather like evidence at a crime scene. My heart stopped. My ears started ringing. The world around me, Mrs. Abernathy's azaleas, the neighbor's sprinkler, the kids riding bikes down the street. It all faded away until there was nothing but me and those 5 little packets that had no business being in my husband's car. Charles and I hadn't needed condoms since Michael was born. After complications with the delivery, the doctor said no more children, and Charles had taken care of that permanently. So why did my 70-year-old husband have condoms in his glove compartment? The answer was as clear as the summer sky above me. As obvious as the lipstick smudge I now noticed on the passenger side headrest, a shade of red I'd never worn in my life. I stood there in Doris Abernathy's carport, those 5 little foil packets burning a hole in my palm, feeling like the world's biggest fool. 45 years. That's how long I'd been married to Charles Montgomery. That's how many Christmases we'd decorated the same artificial tree. How many Sunday pot roasts I'd cooked in the same enamel pan. How many nights I'd fallen asleep to the sound of his breathing. And all that time, I thought I knew him. The heat pressed down on me like a weighted blanket as I slipped back into the driver's seat of his precious Chevy. The leather creaked under me, that familiar sound I'd heard 1,000 times when we'd take Sunday drives out to Lake Lanier. I sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, staring at nothing. My wedding ring caught the sunlight, sending little rainbows dancing across the dashboard. I've never been one for crying, but right then I felt something break loose inside me, like a dam giving way after too much rain. Our house on Peachtree Drive wasn't anything special to look at, just a brick ranch like a dozen others on our street. But Lord, had I poured my heart into that place. The azaleas I'd planted the year Michael graduated high school. The kitchen I'd repainted butter yellow when Charles got promoted at the insurance company. The porch swing where we'd sit in the evenings, watching the lightning bugs come out while the ice melted in our sweet tea. The whole neighborhood thought we were that couple, the one that had figured it all out. Every 4th of July, we hosted the block party in our backyard. Charles at the grill in his Kiss the Cook apron, me refilling everyone's solo cups with my famous punch. Pastor Williams from First Baptist had even asked us to lead the marriage retreat last year. "You two are such an example," he'd said, and I'd blushed like a schoolgirl while Charles squeezed my hand. What a crock of bull that turned out to be. I slipped the condoms into my pocket and locked the car, my mind whirling like a tornado. Mechanically, I walked back across the street, waving at Doris, who'd appeared at her screen door, probably wondering what I was doing in Charles's car. She called something about her tomato plants, but her voice seemed to come from far away, underwater almost. "Just looking for something," I called back, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face clean in two. "Found it." I made it inside our house before my legs gave out. I sank onto the kitchen stool, the cool tile under my bare feet the only thing keeping me anchored to reality. The ceiling fan spun lazily overhead, stirring the humid air but doing little to cool it. From here, I could see our whole life, the refrigerator plastered with Michael's school pictures and postcards from his travels, the china cabinet full of my mother's dishes, the ones I only used for Thanksgiving and Christmas, the little wooden sign over the stove that read, "Bless this home," a wedding gift from my sister Judy. What a joke. What a goddamn joke. In the living room, evidence of Charles was everywhere. His recliner with the permanent dent from his behind, his stack of Field and Stream magazines, his fishing trophies lined up on the mantel like little soldiers. I'd dusted those stupid trophies every week for decades. I'd washed his underwear and ironed his church shirts and remembered which foods gave him heartburn. And all the while, he'd been, what? Sneaking around? Playing me for a fool? The condoms in my pocket felt like they were burning a hole straight through to my skin. The clock on the microwave showed 11:32. The errands Charles claimed to be running would keep him out for at least another hour. Maybe more, if he was meeting her, whoever she was. For a moment, I let myself imagine her. Younger, definitely. Maybe one of those bottle blondes from his office, or someone he'd met at the golf course where he spent every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. Did she know about me? Did she laugh about the trusting wife at home? Did Charles make the same little grunting noise with her that he made with me when he— No, I wouldn't torture myself with that. Instead, I did what Southern women have done since time immemorial when crisis strikes. I made a fresh pitcher of sweet tea. My hands moved automatically. 4 cups of sugar, 8 tea bags, a pinch of baking soda to cut the bitterness, my mama's recipe. The ritual calmed me somewhat, gave me space to think. By the time the tea had steeped and been poured over ice, a plan was forming. Not a full plan, mind you, but the beginnings of one. Charles Montgomery thought he could have his cake and eat it too? Well, we'd just see about that. I called Marge Wilson next door. Marge knows everyone's business in our neighborhood and can spread news faster than the internet. Marge, it's Helen. Listen, I'm doing a special anniversary surprise for Charles, and I need your help keeping it quiet. Marge nearly squealed with delight. She loves being in on secrets. You know I've got your back, honey. What are you planning? It's not your anniversary for months yet. That's why it'll be such a surprise, I said, my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. I'm thinking of throwing a party next Saturday. Could you help spread the word? Nothing fancy, just close friends and neighbors. Of course. Marge was practically bouncing through the phone. How many years will it be? 45, I said, the number suddenly tasting bitter on my tongue. 45 long years. After hanging up, I sat at the kitchen table, rolling one of the condoms between my fingers. The foil caught the light, winking at me like it was in on some private joke. I'd been a good wife, a faithful wife. I'd stood by Charles when the insurance company downsized, and he spent 6 months moping around the house. I'd nursed him through 2 knee replacements and a prostate scare. I'd moved my mother into the guest room during the last stages of her cancer so I could care for her myself, even when Charles complained about the hospice equipment cluttering up the house. I deserved better than this, better than discovering at 67 that my life was built on quicksand. The screen door slammed, making me jump. I shoved the condom back in my pocket just as Charles walked in, carrying a small hardware store bag. "Helly," he said, leaning down to kiss my cheek. "You look flushed. Air conditioning acting up again?" I looked up at my husband of 45 years and smiled. "No, dear," I said calmly. "Everything's working just fine." That night, I lay awake beside Charles, listening to his soft snores. The ceiling fan clicked with each rotation, marking time like a metronome. Outside, cicadas sang their summer song, and somewhere down the street, a dog barked at shadows. All so normal, all so ordinary. Except nothing was ordinary anymore. The distance between Charles and me in our queen-sized bed might as well have been the Grand Canyon. We'd shared this mattress for decades, the same one we'd splurged on for our 30th anniversary when my back started giving me trouble. Memory foam, the salesman had called it. Funny thing about memory, it can comfort you or torture you, depending on what you're remembering. Right now, all I could remember were the signs I'd missed, the late-night phone calls he'd take in the garage, the new shirts he'd bought without me, the sudden interest in cologne when he'd worn nothing but Old Spice since Carter was president, the golf games that left him without a tan line or stories about his buddies' latest jokes. Looking back, it was like reading a book where you already know the ending. All the clues were there in plain sight. When morning came, I moved through our routine like a sleepwalker, fixed his bacon and eggs, poured his coffee, black with 1 sugar, listened to him talk about the Braves game while he folded the Atlanta Journal-Constitution to the sports section. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't crack. If Charles noticed anything off about me, he didn't let on. "Got another golf game today," he said, patting his belly. "Trying to beat my handicap." "I bet you are," I thought, but said, "That's nice, dear. What time will you be home?" "Oh, don't hold dinner. These games with the boys can run long. You know how it is." He winked at me, actually winked, like we were sharing some private joke. "I certainly do," I replied, refilling his coffee cup one last time. After he left, I sat at the kitchen table for a long while, watching the hummingbirds fight over the feeder outside the window. Tiny, beautiful creatures with the hearts of warriors. I'd always admired their ferocity, their refusal to back down despite their size. Maybe it was time I took a page from their book. I picked up the phone and called my sister Judy down in Savannah. If anyone would tell me straight, it would be Judy. She'd never much liked Charles, said he had wandering eyes even at our wedding. "Jude," I said when she answered, "I need to ask you something and I need you not to sugarcoat it." "Well, good morning to you too, Helen," she laughed. "What's got your pantyhose in a twist this early?" "Did you ever suspect Charles was cheating on me?" The silence on the line stretched so long, I thought we'd been disconnected. Finally, Judy sighed. "Oh, honey, what happened?" That was all it took. The dam broke, and words poured out of me like a flash flood. The condoms, the lipstick, the golf games, all of it. Judy listened without interrupting, which wasn't like her at all. When I finally ran out of steam, she cleared her throat. "I never had proof," she said carefully. "But yes, I suspected. Especially after Michael's wedding. Remember Charles disappeared for almost an hour during the reception? I saw him coming back from the hotel rooms with his tie askew. I almost said something then, but you were so happy that day. I just couldn't bear to." A memory surfaced. Charles claiming he'd needed to lie down because the champagne had given him a headache. Me worrying about his blood pressure medication interacting with the alcohol. What a fool I'd been. "What are you going to do?" Judy asked. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But whatever it is, it'll be on my terms." After hanging up, I did something I'd never done before. I got in my sensible Buick sedan and followed my husband. I parked across from the Magnolia Creek Golf Club and waited, sipping on a styrofoam cup of gas station coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since Nixon resigned. Sure enough, Charles's Chevy pulled into the lot at 9:30, right on schedule. He got out, golf bag slung over his shoulder, and headed inside. I waited, thinking he'd reappear on the first tee with his usual foursome, Hank, Bernie, and what's-his-name with the toupee that looked like a drowned squirrel. But 15 minutes later, Charles emerged from the clubhouse without his golf clubs. He hopped back in his car and drove off, heading north on Peachtree Road. My heart hammered against my ribs as I pulled out to follow him, careful to stay a few cars back. We ended up in Buckhead, that fancy part of Atlanta where the houses look like small hotels and everyone drives a car that costs more than our first house. Charles pulled into the circular driveway of a sprawling Tudor-style home with perfectly manicured hedges and a fountain out front. Real classy joint. He checked his hair in the rearview mirror before getting out, something I'd seen him do 1,000 times before church or dinner parties. But the way he straightened his shoulders and put a little bounce in his step as he walked to the front door told me everything I needed to know. The door opened before he could knock. I couldn't see who greeted him from my position across the street, but I saw his face light up like Times Square on New Year's Eve. Then he stepped inside, and the door closed behind him. I sat there in my Buick, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The air conditioning struggled against the Georgia heat, blowing lukewarm air that did nothing to cool the fire building inside me. I thought I might be sick right there in the car. But something strange happened instead. As the minutes ticked by, the shock and nausea gave way to something harder, something colder. Rage, yes, but controlled rage. The kind that doesn't explode, it calculates. I took out my phone and snapped a picture of the house, making sure to get the street number. Then I pulled up Google Maps and saved the location. Evidence, just in case. On the drive home, I passed a billboard for some lawyer. "Wronged by a cheating spouse?" it asked in bold red letters. "You deserve your fair share." Below was a picture of a man in an expensive suit, pointing at me like Uncle Sam in those old recruitment posters. I almost laughed. My fair share wasn't what I was after. Back at home, I poured myself a rare midday glass of sherry, the good stuff we kept for Christmas, and sat on the back porch. Our yard stretched out before me, every flower bed weeded, every bush trimmed. I'd done that, me and my arthritic knees and sun-spotted hands. Charles just took credit when the neighbors complimented our gardening. A hummingbird zoomed up to the feeder, its wings a blur of movement. It hovered there, tiny and fierce, ready to fight off any challenger for what it wanted. I raised my glass in a silent toast. "That's right, little friend," I murmured. "No more playing nice." By the time I heard Charles's car in the driveway that evening, I had a plan. Not just any plan, a good one. The kind that would make Charles Montgomery wish he'd never even thought about straying. It would take patience. It would take cunning. It would take a side of Helen Montgomery that Charles had never seen before, and Lord help him when he did. The next morning at church, I sat in our usual pew, third from the front on the right side, where we'd sat every Sunday since 1982. Charles was beside me, his shoulder pressed against mine, Bible open on his lap. He smelled of that new cologne and too much aftershave, like he was trying to cover something up. Maybe he was. Pastor Williams was preaching about Proverbs today. "A faithful person will be richly blessed," he read, "but one eager to get rich will not go unpunished." I glanced at Charles from the corner of my eye. He was nodding along, that self-satisfied look on his face like the message was meant for everyone but him. When the collection plate came around, he dropped in his usual $20 bill, folded just so, making sure Mrs. Pemberton next to us could see his generosity. I added my own donation, a crumpled $5 that I'd had in my purse for who knows how long. I wasn't feeling particularly generous today. "You're quiet," Charles whispered, as the choir stood to sing. "Everything okay?" I gave him my Sunday smile, the one I'd perfected over decades of church socials and neighborhood barbecues. "Just thinking about what to make for dinner," I lied. What I was really thinking about was the Tudor house in Buckhead and who might be inside it. After the service, we did our usual rounds in the church courtyard, Charles shaking hands with the deacons, me chatting with the ladies from my Bible study group. Everyone smiling, everyone playing their part in this small-town theater production called The Perfect Christian Community. "Helen, sugar, you look tired," said Betty Wilkerson, her lacquered hair not moving an inch despite the breeze. "You sleeping okay?" "Oh, you know how it is at our age," I deflected. "Up 3 times a night to pee." The ladies laughed, that polite titter that doesn't reach their eyes. But Betty kept looking at me, her head tilted like a curious bird. Betty had been divorced twice. She knew the signs of a marriage in trouble. "Well, if you ever need to talk," she said, squeezing my arm, "I make a mean pitcher of margaritas." I nodded, grateful for the offer, but not ready to admit anything out loud. Saying it would make it real, and I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. On the drive home, Charles turned on the oldies station. Patsy Cline was singing about falling to pieces. How appropriate. "I've been thinking," Charles said, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel in time with the music. "Maybe we should take that cruise we've been talking about for our anniversary this year." My heart skipped a beat. The cruise had been my idea, something I'd been saving for out of my small Social Security check. I'd mentioned it months ago, but Charles had been lukewarm at best. Now suddenly he was interested. "What brought this on?" I asked, careful to keep my voice neutral. He shrugged, eyes on the road. "Life's short, Helly. We're not getting any younger. Might as well enjoy ourselves while we still can." The irony nearly made me laugh out loud. Charles was certainly enjoying himself all right, just not with me. "I'll think about it," I said, turning to look out the window at the passing neighborhoods. Families pushing strollers, kids on bikes, couples walking hand in hand. Normal people living normal lives. Or maybe they were all hiding secrets too. By the time we got home, I'd made a decision. I needed to know who she was. Not just for my plan, but for my sanity. I needed a name, a face, something concrete to replace the shadowy figure who'd invaded my marriage. While Charles settled in his recliner to watch the Braves game, I made an excuse about checking on Marge's cat while she was visiting her daughter. Instead, I drove straight to the Buckhead house. Sunday traffic in Atlanta is light, and I made good time. The house looked different in the full light of day. Bigger, more imposing. Money. That's what it screamed. Old money, based on the mature oak trees and established gardens. The kind of place where people have summer as a verb and know which fork to use for each course at dinner. I parked down the street and waited, feeling like a character in one of those detective shows Charles was always watching. What was I expecting to see? The other woman strolling out to collect the Sunday paper? Charles showing up for a quickie between the baseball innings? After an hour of nothing but a teenager mowing the lawn next door and a UPS truck delivering a package, I was about to give up. Then the front door opened and a woman stepped out. She was younger than me, but not the 20-something bimbo I'd imagined. Maybe late 50s, her blonde hair cut in an expensive bob that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She wore white linen pants and a silk blouse, pearls at her throat, country club casual. As she walked to the sleek Mercedes in the driveway, she moved with the confident grace of someone who's never worried about making rent or stretching ground beef with breadcrumbs. I sank lower in my seat as she drove past, getting only a glimpse of her profile. She looked normal. Not a homewrecker from Central Casting, just a well-preserved woman with good taste and better financial planning. Something about that made it worse. Charles wasn't having some midlife crisis with a desperate floozy. He'd chosen someone of substance, someone established, someone who probably had intelligent conversations and a retirement account. I felt sick again, but forced myself to start the car and follow her. She led me to Phipps Plaza, that fancy mall where I'd never bought anything but a Christmas ornament once when it was on clearance. She parked in the valet section. Of course she did, and disappeared inside. I needed to know more. And if you're feeling this story so far, don't forget to subscribe. I've got more real-life stories that'll hit you right in the heart. I found a spot in the regular lot and hurried in after her, feeling desperately out of place in my church dress from Kohl's and sensible shoes. The mall was a temple to wealth, gleaming marble floors, soft lighting, stores with names I couldn't pronounce. I spotted her in Nordstrom, browsing through a rack of dresses that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. She held one up, a deep blue number with a plunging neckline, examining it with a critical eye. "Mrs. Patterson?" A saleswoman approached her. "So good to see you again. How's Dr. Patterson doing?" Dr. Patterson, so that was her name, and she was married too. "Oh, Richard's fine, up to his ears in patients as usual." Her voice was cultured, with just a hint of southern softness underneath. "I'm looking for something for the hospital fundraiser next weekend. Something that says, 'Donate generously.'" They both laughed like it was the funniest joke ever told. I retreated behind a display of handbags, processing this new information. Dr. and Mrs. Patterson, a doctor's wife. That explained the house, the car, the casual shopping at Nordstrom on a Sunday afternoon. But who was she to Charles? And more importantly, who was Charles to her? I followed her through the mall at a safe distance, watching as she made purchases with a platinum credit card, accepted shopping bags from eager salespeople, and eventually stopped for a glass of wine at a cafe in the center court. As she sipped her Chardonnay, she checked her watch several times, glancing around expectantly, waiting for someone. My stomach dropped when I saw who it was. Charles, my Charles, strolling through the mall like he owned the place, making a beeline for her table. He bent down, kissed her cheek, lingering just a second too long, and took the seat across from her. I ducked behind a large potted palm, heart pounding so loud I was sure everyone could hear it. From my hiding spot, I could see them, but couldn't hear their conversation over the mall's ambient noise. But I didn't need to hear the words. Their body language said it all. The way they leaned toward each other, the casual touches, her hand on his as she laughed at something he said, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face. The intimacy of it knocked the wind out of me. This wasn't just sex. This was connection. The kind Charles and I hadn't had in years, maybe decades. I must have made some sound, a gasp or a sob, because a security guard looked my way, frowning. I turned and walked quickly toward the exit, not stopping until I reached my car. The drive home was a blur. I didn't remember stopping at red lights or yielding at intersections. My body was on autopilot while my mind raced with images I couldn't unsee. Charles and Mrs. Patterson, the doctor's wife. The casual intimacy between them that spoke of more than a fling. Much more. When I pulled into our driveway, the garage door was open. Charles's Chevy was already there, gleaming under the overhead light like nothing was wrong. Like its owner hadn't just shattered my world for the second time in 3 days. I sat in my car for a long moment, hands still gripping the steering wheel. Through the kitchen window, I could see Charles moving around, probably fixing himself a sandwich or pouring a glass of tea, acting like a man who belonged there, a man with nothing to hide. But I knew better now. I knew about the lipstick on the headrest and the condoms in the glove compartment. I knew about the Tudor house in Buckhead and the wine at Phipps Plaza. I knew Charles Montgomery wasn't the man I'd thought I married, and he certainly wasn't the man our friends and neighbors believed him to be. The rage I'd been tamping down rose up again, hot and fierce in my chest. But beneath it was something else, a cold, clear certainty about what needed to happen next. I picked up my purse and walked into the house through the garage entrance. Charles was at the counter, making a sandwich just as I'd pictured. He looked up when I came in, smiling that familiar smile that once made my heart flutter but now made my stomach turn. "Where have you been, Helly?" he asked, spreading mayonnaise on white bread. "Thought you were just checking on Marge's cat." "Had to run a few errands," I said, setting my purse on the counter. "Lost track of time." He nodded, not really listening. Typical Charles, always half present in our conversations. I used to think he was just distracted by work or tired from his busy days. Now I knew better. His mind was elsewhere because his heart was elsewhere. "You missed a good game," he said. "Braves won in the 9th. Freeman hit it out of the park." I made a non-committal sound and opened the refrigerator, staring at its contents without really seeing them. "What do you say to the man who's betrayed you? How do you sit across from him at dinner and pass the salt like nothing's changed?" "I'm not very hungry," I said, closing the fridge. "Think I'll lie down for a bit. Church always takes it out of me these days." Charles looked up, a flicker of concern crossing his face. "You feeling okay? You've been quiet today." The audacity of his concern made me want to scream. Instead, I gave him a tight smile. "Just tired. Nothing to worry about." As I walked toward our bedroom, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. I hardly recognized the woman staring back at me. Her eyes were too bright, her lips pressed into a thin line. She looked like someone on the edge of something. Breakdown or breakthrough, I wasn't sure which. In our bedroom, I kicked off my shoes and lay on top of the covers, staring at the ceiling. The fan spun lazily overhead, same as it had for decades. How many nights had I lain here beside Charles, thinking our marriage was solid, if not perfect? How many mornings had I woken up next to him, grateful for another day together? All those years, wasted on a lie. My mind drifted to Mrs. Patterson. What did Charles tell her about me? Was I the nagging wife, the boring homebody, the obligation he couldn't shake? Or did he simply act like I didn't exist when he was with her? I rolled onto my side, facing Charles's empty half of the bed. His pillow still held the indent of his head, and I could smell his shampoo, the same brand he'd used since we were newlyweds. I'd bought it just last week at the Publix, tossing it into the cart without a second thought, one of 100 small acts of caretaking I performed routinely. My cell phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Judy. "Everything okay? Call me." I ignored it. I wasn't ready to talk, not even to my sister. What would I say? That my husband of nearly half a century was having an affair with a doctor's wife? That I'd followed them like some desperate private eye in a bad movie? That I was lying in bed plotting what exactly? Divorce seemed the obvious answer. I could call one of those lawyers from the billboards, get my fair share as they promised. But at our age, with our modest retirement savings, dividing everything would leave us both struggling. And to what end? So Charles could move into Mrs. Patterson's Tudor mansion? So I could become the pitiful ex-wife living in a sad little apartment, the subject of church gossip? No. Divorce might be the right choice eventually, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't justice. Charles deserved to feel what I was feeling, the humiliation, the betrayal, the sickening realization that your life isn't what you thought it was. He needed to experience that publicly, the way I'd have to if we divorced. I sat up suddenly, an idea taking shape. The anniversary party, the one I'd told Marge I was planning as a surprise for Charles. What if it became the perfect stage for a different kind of surprise? My heart raced as the plan crystallized in my mind. It would require preparation, timing, and a certain ruthlessness I wasn't sure I possessed. But then I remembered Charles kissing Mrs. Patterson's cheek in the mall, his fingers lingering on her face, and I knew I could do it. I got up and went to my dresser, opening the jewelry box Charles had given me for our 25th anniversary. Inside was a false bottom where I kept emergency cash, a habit from my mother's generation. $300 in 20s, enough to start with. Next, I pulled out my address book. Yes, I still kept one, despite Michael's attempts to get me to use my smartphone for everything. I flipped through it until I found the name I was looking for, Letitia Burns. We'd worked together at the elementary school before we both retired. Letitia's daughter was a private investigator now. I'd need documentation, proof that couldn't be denied. I reached for my phone to call her, then paused. Charles might check our phone records. He handled all the bills, after all. Better to use a burner phone, like in those crime shows he loved so much. The thought made me laugh softly. Who would have thought that Helen Montgomery, church choir member and blue ribbon pie baker, would be thinking about burner phones and private investigators? But desperate times called for desperate measures, as my mama used to say. I heard Charles moving around in the kitchen, probably cleaning up after his sandwich. Soon he'd settle back in his recliner for his Sunday afternoon nap. The familiar rhythm of our life together continued on the surface, while underneath, everything had changed. I tucked the money into my purse and put the address book back in its drawer. Tomorrow, I'd start putting my plan into motion. Tomorrow, I'd begin dismantling the life Charles thought he could lead. Faithful husband in Peachtree Drive, passionate lover in Buckhead. For now, I lay back down and closed my eyes, allowing myself to really feel the pain he'd caused. The betrayal, the years of lies. I let the hurt wash over me in waves, acknowledging each one before letting it recede. Because after pain comes purpose. And my purpose now was clear as day. Charles Montgomery needed to learn that some vows shouldn't be broken, and I was just the woman to teach him that lesson. Monday morning dawned bright and clear, the kind of Georgia summer day where the heat rises up from the asphalt in shimmering waves and the humidity makes your clothes stick to your skin before you've even left the house. Charles was up early, whistling in the shower like he didn't have a care in the world. I lay in bed listening to him, wondering how many times he'd come home from her and stepped into that same shower, washing away her perfume before sliding in beside me. "Heading out early today," he announced, knotting his tie in front of the mirror. Board meeting at the senior center. Charles had been on the board of the Peachtree Senior Center since his retirement from the insurance company 5 years ago. It gave him purpose, he'd said, a way to give back to the community. I'd been proud of him for that. "Will you be home for dinner?" I asked, knowing the answer. "Don't wait up," he said, bending to kiss my forehead. "These meetings can run long, and the fellas usually grab a bite after." The fellas? Right. I wondered if Mrs. Patterson knew how many board meetings her boyfriend attended. "Drive safe," I said, the words automatic after so many years. He nodded, checked his hair one last time in the mirror, and left. As soon as I heard his car pull out of the driveway, I sprang into action. First stop, the Walmart on Moreland Avenue, far enough from our neighborhood that I wouldn't run into anyone we knew. I bought a prepaid phone with cash, feeling like a character in one of those crime shows as I avoided looking directly at the security cameras. In the parking lot, I activated the phone and made my first call to Letitia's daughter, Shanice Burns. Her business card said, "Discreet Investigations," with a logo of a magnifying glass. It seemed almost too obvious, but I suppose people needed to know what they were getting. "Burns Investigations," a crisp voice answered. "Is this Shanice? This is Helen Montgomery. I worked with your mother at Peachtree Elementary." "Mrs. Montgomery, sure, I remember you. Those Christmas cookies you used to make were legendary. What can I do for you?" I hesitated. Saying it out loud made it real in a way I wasn't fully prepared for. But there was no turning back now. "I need evidence of my husband's affair," I said, the words sour in my mouth. "Photos, dates, times, everything you can get." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I see," Shanice said, her tone softening. "I'm sorry you're going through this, Mrs. Montgomery. Why don't you come by the office this afternoon? We can discuss the details in person." We arranged to meet at 2:00, and I ended the call feeling both sick and strangely empowered. I was taking action. No more Helen the doormat, Helen the blind, trusting wife. This was Helen the Avenger. My next call was to Marge, to check on how the anniversary party plans were progressing. "Oh, honey, everyone's so excited," she gushed. "The Johnsons are bringing their famous deviled eggs, and Pastor William said he'd say a few words about lasting love." The irony made me wince. "That's wonderful, Marge. Remember, it's a surprise, so not a word to Charles." "My lips are sealed tighter than a jar of Betty Watson's pickles," she promised. "Speaking of which, I was thinking we could do a little slideshow of your years together. Do you have any old photos I could borrow?" I told her I'd drop some off later, my mind already racing ahead to what those photos represented, a marriage built on sand. But they'd serve my purpose. The more people believed in our perfect union, the more devastating the revelation would be. At Shanice's office, a small but professional space above a dentist in Midtown, I laid out everything I knew about Charles's affair. The condoms, the lipstick, the Tudor house, the meetings at the mall. Shanice took notes, nodding occasionally. "And this Mrs. Patterson," she said. "You're sure she's married to a doctor?" That's what she told the saleswoman at Nordstrom, Dr. Richard Patterson. Shanice smiled, a quick flash of teeth. "That makes my job easier. Doctors leave paper trails. We'll have his address, practice information, everything by tomorrow." She tapped her pen against her notepad. "What exactly are you planning to do with this information, Mrs. Montgomery? Are you considering divorce?" I hesitated. "I haven't decided yet. For now, I just want proof. Undeniable proof." Shanice gave me a long look, her dark eyes assessing. "This isn't my first rodeo, Mrs. Montgomery. Most people who come through that door already know what they want to do. They just need the evidence to do it." She was right, of course. I did know. "I want him exposed," I said finally. "Not just to me, but to everyone who thinks they know Charles Montgomery." She nodded, no judgment in her expression. "I can get you what you need. It'll take a few days and cost you about $600, half now, half when I deliver the evidence." I handed over 3 crisp $100 bills from my emergency fund. "When can you start?" "Already have," she said, tucking the money into a desk drawer. I ran the name Richard Patterson while we were talking. There are 3 in the greater Atlanta area. One's a pediatrician, one's a pathologist, and one's, she glanced at her computer screen, a plastic surgeon with a practice in Buckhead. "That's him," I said with certainty. "A plastic surgeon." Of course. That explained Mrs. Patterson's suspiciously smooth neck and forehead. Back in my car, I checked the burner phone. No messages, which was good. Charles had no idea it existed. I programmed Shanice's number into it and tucked it into the zippered pocket of my purse. My next stop was the Kroger on Ponce de Leon. Not our usual store. Charles preferred the Publix closer to home. But I needed supplies for phase 2 of my plan, and I couldn't risk running into anyone who might mention it to him. I filled my cart methodically. Imodium, the extra strength kind. X-Lax, 3 boxes. Laxative tea, prune juice, magnesium citrate, the stuff they give you before a colonoscopy. If mixed properly, nothing would happen right away. The effects would take hours to kick in, ideally at the most embarrassing possible moment. The cashier raised an eyebrow at my purchases. Somebody having some digestive issues? I gave her my best church lady smile. My poor husband. It's just terrible what men of a certain age go through. She nodded sympathetically and bagged my items. If she only knew. At home, I hid my supplies in the back of the linen closet, behind the guest towels we never used. Then I pulled out our photo albums, 5 decades of memories preserved in plastic sleeves and cardboard pages. Charles and me on our wedding day, my white dress simple but elegant, his hair still dark and thick. Charles holding baby Michael, looking terrified and proud. Family vacations, Christmases, anniversaries. I selected a dozen photos spanning our marriage and put them in an envelope for Marge. The slideshow would be perfect, a visual reminder of the vows Charles had broken, the life he'd thrown away. As I flipped through the albums, a photo slipped out from between the pages. Charles and me at Niagara Falls, about 10 years ago. We were standing by the railing, water thundering behind us, both of us squinting into the sun. His arm was around my waist, pulling me close. We looked. Happy, genuinely happy. Had it all been a lie, even then? Or had something changed? When had I stopped being enough for him? The questions swirled in my mind like fallen leaves in a storm gutter, but I pushed them aside. It didn't matter when or why. What mattered was what happened next. I heard Charles's car in the driveway much earlier than expected. Quickly, I shoved the albums back onto the shelf and composed myself. When he walked in, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and my book club novel, The Picture of a Contented Wife. Meeting end early? I asked, not looking up from my book. Cancelled, he said, loosening his tie. Bill Thompson came down with something. Probably that stomach bug that's going around. I nodded, hiding a smile behind my teacup. A stomach bug, how appropriate. I thought I'd take you out to dinner, Charles said, surprising me. That Italian place you like on Highland? What do you say? I looked up at him, searching his face for, what, guilt? Signs of his other life? But all I saw was my husband of 45 years looking at me with what appeared to be genuine affection. For a moment, I wavered. Could I go through with my plan? Could I really destroy this man who, despite everything, had been my partner for most of my life? Then I remembered Mrs. Patterson's hand on his at the mall, his fingers brushing her hair aside, the condoms, the lies, years of lies. That sounds lovely, Charles, I said, closing my book. Let me just freshen up. 3 days later, my burner phone buzzed with a text from Shanice. Package ready for pickup. My heart skipped a beat. The evidence was in. I told Charles I was having lunch with my book club ladies, a lie he accepted without question, too preoccupied with his own secrets to notice mine. The mid-July heat was oppressive as I drove to Shanice's office, the air conditioning in my Buick struggling to keep up. By the time I parked, my blouse was sticking to my back and my hands were trembling on the steering wheel. Upstairs, Shanice was waiting with a manila envelope and a sympathetic smile. Mrs. Montgomery, she said, gesturing to a chair, I've got everything you asked for. I sat down, my mouth suddenly dry. Tell me. She opened the envelope and spread its contents across her desk, photos mostly. Charles and Mrs. Patterson, whose real name, according to Shanice, was Elizabeth, entering and leaving the Tudor house. The two of them at a restaurant I didn't recognize, holding hands across the table. Charles carrying shopping bags at Lenox Mall, trailing behind Elizabeth like an obedient puppy. But the worst was a photo of them kissing in his car, his precious Chevy, parked in what looked like a secluded spot at Chastain Park. His hands in her hair, her body leaning across the console toward him. The intimacy of it was like a physical blow. They meet 3 or 4 times a week, Shanice said, her voice gentle but professional. Usually at her house when the doctor is at work. Sometimes for lunch at out-of-the-way places. Twice I observed them checking into the St. Regis Hotel downtown. I stared at the photos, trying to reconcile this version of Charles, passionate, attentive, clearly besotted, with the man who'd spent the last decade dozing in his recliner every night after dinner. "And her husband?" I asked, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. "Dr. Richard Patterson, age 62, chief of plastic surgery at Northside Hospital, by all accounts equally busy with his own affair, with his 32-year-old office manager." Shanice raised an eyebrow. "Seems like nobody's faithful in this scenario." "Except me," I said quietly. Shanice nodded, no pity in her expression, just understanding. "There's more," she said, sliding a typed report toward me. "Financial information. Your husband has been moving money around. Small amounts, nothing that would raise flags with the IRS, but over time," she tapped a figure at the bottom of the page. "That's about $30,000 he's funneled into a separate account over the past 18 months. The betrayal kept getting deeper. Not just his heart and body, but our financial security too. The retirement we'd planned together. The nest egg we'd built dollar by painful dollar over decades of careful saving. And this," Shanice continued, "is the kicker." She handed me a printed email. "Found it in a less-than-secure account he apparently uses just for communicating with her. They're planning a trip to the Cayman Islands next month. One-way tickets." One way. He wasn't just having an affair, he was planning to leave me. To disappear with our money and start a new life with Elizabeth Patterson. "Are you all right, Mrs. Montgomery?" Shanice's voice seemed to come from far away. I nodded mechanically, gathering the photos and papers into a neat stack. "I'd like copies of everything, please." "Already made," she said, sliding another envelope toward me, "along with backup digital copies on this USB drive. The originals are yours to keep. What you do with them is your business." She hesitated. "I know it's not my place, but are you going to be okay?" Was I? I didn't know, but I knew what I had to do next. "I will be," I said, putting the envelopes in my purse and standing up. "Thank you for your help, Shanice. Your mother would be proud of the woman you've become." She smiled at that, looking younger suddenly. "That means a lot, Mrs. Montgomery, and for what it's worth, he's a fool." On the drive home, I made 2 stops. First, at Walgreens to buy the biggest poster board they had and some markers. Then at Office Depot to make enlarged copies of the most damning photos. Charles kissing Elizabeth, Charles entering the St. Regis, Charles carrying shopping bags like her personal bellhop. By the time I got home, Charles was out, at golf again. Perfect. I spread my materials across the dining room table and got to work. The poster would be the centerpiece of my plan, the visual aid for the speech I would give at our anniversary party. A speech that would bring Charles Montgomery's carefully constructed double life crashing down around his ears. The party was scheduled for Saturday, just 3 days away. Marge had already confirmed that 40 people would be attending, our closest friends, neighbors, church members. Even Michael was flying in from California as part of the surprise. I hadn't told my son what was really happening. He'd find out along with everyone else. I didn't hate Charles. That was the strange part. After 45 years, hate wasn't possible. We were too entangled, our lives too intertwined. But I was done being a fool. Done being the last to know. Done being the sweet, accommodating wife while he planned his escape with another woman. As I worked on my poster, carefully gluing the photos in place and adding captions in bold red marker, I felt calmer than I had in days. This was right. This was just. Charles deserved to feel the humiliation he'd been setting me up for. He didn't just have one life, he had 2, maybe more. If you want to hear more stories like this, go ahead and subscribe now. The next day was Thursday, and I began phase 2 of my plan. While Charles was in the shower, I mixed a carefully measured dose of extra-strength Imodium into his coffee. Not enough to cause problems immediately, but enough to start building up in his system. A time bomb of constipation that would detonate right around Saturday's party. I'd done my research. The Imodium would block him up something fierce. Then, Saturday morning, I'd switched to the laxatives, slipped into his orange juice, his coffee, maybe even his toothpaste. By party time, his insides would be at war with themselves. Gastric Armageddon. Was it petty? Absolutely. Was it dangerous? No, I'd checked the dosages carefully. Uncomfortable, embarrassing, possibly even humiliating? That was the point. Thursday evening, Charles complained of feeling a bit off. Maybe it's that stomach bug that's going around, I suggested innocently. The one Bill Thompson had. He nodded, rubbing his abdomen. Maybe. I don't feel right, that's for sure. Why don't you take it easy tomorrow? I said, the picture of wifely concern. Skip golf. Rest up for the weekend. He agreed readily enough, which told me he wasn't really planning on golf anyway. Probably had a date with Elizabeth. Too bad he'd be spending it on the toilet instead. Friday morning, I doubled the Imodium dose in his coffee. By afternoon, he was visibly uncomfortable, shifting in his recliner and making frequent trips to the bathroom. Though from the sounds of it, nothing much was happening. Should I call the doctor? I asked, hovering in the doorway as he emerged from another unsuccessful bathroom visit. No, he said, wincing. Just some bad indigestion. I'll be fine by tomorrow. If you're sure, I said, turning away to hide my smile. I've got some errands to run. Need anything while I'm out? He shook his head, already shuffling back to his recliner. Poor Charles. He had no idea what was coming. My final errand was to pick up the cake I'd ordered from the bakery across town. Not our usual place. Charles might have gotten suspicious, but a shop recommended by Shanice. The cake was beautiful. 3 tiers of vanilla buttercream with delicate sugar flowers cascading down one side. Exactly what you'd expect for an anniversary celebration. Except for the custom topper I'd ordered. Instead of the traditional bride and groom, it featured a single figure, a woman standing alone, head held high. Me, post-Charles. The bakery girl had given me an odd look when I'd described what I wanted, but she'd done a beautiful job. Special occasion? She asked as she boxed it up. Very, I replied, handling over my credit card. It's the beginning of the rest of my life. Saturday morning arrived bright and clear, like God himself was shining a spotlight on Charles Montgomery's day of reckoning. I woke early, my heart racing with a mixture of anticipation and a strange kind of grief. Today was the day everything would change. After this, there would be no going back to the comfortable fiction we'd been living. Charles was still asleep beside me, his breathing labored, his face pinched even in repose. The Imodium had done its work. He'd been up half the night, his stomach gurgling and cramping, making trips to the bathroom that produced nothing but frustration and growing discomfort. I slipped out of bed and padded to the kitchen to start breakfast. Today's menu: pancakes with real maple syrup, Charles's favorite, crispy bacon, fresh orange juice, and of course coffee. All vehicles for the carefully measured doses of laxatives I would administer throughout the morning. The house was quiet, except for the sizzle of bacon in the pan and the soft hum of the refrigerator. Outside, birds were singing their morning songs, oblivious to the human drama about to unfold. I moved through my kitchen with practiced ease, the rhythm of breakfast making as familiar to my hands as my own heartbeat. How many thousands of meals had I prepared in this room? How many times had I watched Charles eat what I'd made, never thinking to question if I deserved more than his distracted, "Thanks, Helly, this is good." By the time Charles stumbled into the kitchen, drawn by the smell of bacon and coffee, I had his place set at the table. The blue placemat he preferred, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution folded to the sports section, a tall glass of orange juice waiting. The perfect wifely tableau. "Morning," he grunted, lowering himself gingerly into his chair. "Didn't sleep worth a damn." "Still not feeling well?" I asked, the picture of concern as I poured his doctored coffee. Maybe you should call Dr. Hendricks. Nah, he said, reaching for the orange juice, also laced with laxative. Just need to get something in my stomach. This looks great, Helly. I watched as he drank half the juice in one gulp, then took a long sip of coffee. The trap was set. Any plans today? He asked, spreading butter on his pancakes. The domesticity of the question almost made me laugh. If only he knew what plans I had. Oh, this and that, I said vaguely. Marge might come over later. You know how she likes to chat. He nodded, already focusing on his newspaper. Charles had long ago mastered the art of tuning me out while appearing to listen. Just one of the many small betrayals I'd overlooked for years. After breakfast, I cleared the dishes while Charles showered. I'd taken the liberty of adding a special ingredient to his body wash as well, just a touch of the magnesium citrate, not enough to be noticed, but enough to be absorbed through the skin. By early afternoon, his insides would be in full revolt. Once he was dressed and settled in his recliner, with the TV tuned to a golf tournament, I made my excuses and left to help Marge with some church business. In reality, I drove to the community center we'd rented for the party, where a small army of neighbors and friends was already setting up. The hall looked beautiful. Marge and the ladies from my Bible study had outdone themselves with blue and silver decorations, tablecloths, centerpieces, strings of twinkling lights. A table at the front held our wedding photo, enlarged and framed. Beside it, space waited for the anniversary cake, and behind that, covered with a cloth, stood my special presentation, the poster board with the evidence of Charles's betrayal. Helen! Marge hurried over, her face flushed with excitement. Everything looks wonderful, doesn't it? Pastor Williams just called to confirm he'll be here at 4 to say a few words before dinner, and the caterers are all set up in the kitchen. I smiled, letting her chatter wash over me. Poor Marge. She thought she was helping to celebrate a marriage. Instead, she was helping to bury one. Has anyone heard from Michael? I asked, scanning the room. My son was supposed to have flown in last night, staying with friends to maintain the surprise. Right here, Mom. I turned to see my son walking toward me, arms outstretched. Michael was Charles's spitting image. Same height, same build, same smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Seeing him was like looking at a younger version of the man I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. Oh, sweetheart, I said, hugging him tight. It's so good to see you. You too, Mom. He pulled back to look at me. Everything okay? You seem tense. Perceptive, just like his father used to be. Just party nerves, I assured him. There's a lot going on today. He nodded, accepting my explanation. Dad has no idea, right? He's going to be blown away. You have no idea, I thought. Completely surprised, I promised. For the next few hours, I kept busy with final preparations, checking table settings, arranging name cards, making sure the bar was stocked with Charles's favorite whiskey. I wanted everything to be perfect. This would be a party no one in our circle would ever forget. At 3 o'clock, I called Charles on my regular phone. Honey, can you meet me at the community center? There's an issue with one of the light fixtures in the bathroom, and Marge thinks you might be able to fix it. He sighed heavily. Today? I'm still not feeling great, Helly. Please, it won't take long and I'd really appreciate it. I injected just the right note of helpless femininity into my voice, a tone that had never failed to get Charles to do what I wanted. Fine, he grumbled. Give me 15 minutes. I hung up and turned to Marge. He's on his way. Everyone hide. There was a flurry of activity as 40 people found hiding spots behind tables, chairs, and decorative columns. Michael stood beside me, bouncing on his toes with excitement. He's going to love this, Mom. I squeezed his hand. It's certainly going to be memorable. 17 minutes later, Charles was always, reliably, a few minutes late to everything. The doors to the community center opened. My husband stepped inside, looking pale and uncomfortable in khaki pants and a polo shirt. He squinted into the dimly lit room. Helly? Marge? Where's this light fixture that needs... Surprise! Everyone jumped out, cheering and applauding. Charles's jaw dropped, his eyes widening as he took in the decorated hall, the crowd of familiar faces, the banner overhead that read, "Happy 45th Anniversary, Charles and Helen." For a moment, he looked genuinely touched. Then his eyes found mine, and I saw something else flicker across his face. Guilt. Panic. The look of a man caught in a trap of his own making. "Speech!" someone called, and others took up the cry. "Speech! Speech!" Charles was propelled forward by friendly hands, guided to the front of the room where I stood waiting. He reached for my hand, his palm clammy against mine. "Helen," he murmured, "you did all this?" "I wanted it to be special," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. 45 years is quite an accomplishment, don't you think? Before he could answer, Pastor Williams stepped up to the microphone. "Friends, we're gathered here today to celebrate something truly remarkable in our modern world, a marriage that has stood the test of time." The crowd murmured approval. Charles shifted beside me, one hand now pressed to his stomach. The laxatives were beginning their work. Timing, as they say, is everything. "Charles and Helen Montgomery have been pillars of our community," Pastor Williams continued. "Examples of commitment, faithfulness, and enduring love." Charles made a small, strangled sound beside me. Sweat had broken out on his forehead, and his complexion had taken on a greenish tinge. "Are you okay?" I whispered, knowing full well he wasn't. "Bathroom," he hissed. "Where's the bathroom in this place?" I pointed to a door at the far end of the hall, deliberately far from where we stood. "Through there, down the hall on the left." He nodded jerkily and began edging away, trying to be discreet as Pastor Williams extolled the virtues of our supposedly model marriage. "Charles embodies what it means to be a devoted husband," the pastor was saying, as Charles took his first desperate steps toward the bathroom. "His unwavering commitment to Helen is an inspiration to us all." I watched my husband's retreating back, noting the slight hunch of his shoulders, the urgency in his step. Perfect. Everything was going according to plan. Charles was gone for almost 20 minutes. Pastor Williams wrapped up his speech, and the guests mingled awkwardly, casting curious glances toward the bathroom door. I circulated through the crowd, accepting congratulations with a gracious smile, assuring everyone that Charles was just feeling a little under the weather, but would be right back. Michael sidled up to me, concern etched on his face. "Is Dad okay?" He looked pretty rough. "Oh, you know your father," I said lightly. "Probably just nervous about being the center of attention. He never did like surprises." He was about to get the surprise of his life. When Charles finally emerged from the bathroom, he looked like a man who'd seen his own ghost. His face was ashen, his hair damp with sweat, his polo shirt clinging to his chest. He made his way back to me, each step careful and deliberate. "Helen," he said in a low, urgent voice, "I need to go home. Now. I'm sick." I looked at him with wide, innocent eyes. "But honey, we haven't even cut the cake yet. Everyone's waiting." "I don't care," he hissed. "I think I might be dying." "Don't be dramatic," I said, patting his arm. "It's just a little stomach upset. Here, have some ginger ale." I handed him a glass from a nearby table. What he didn't know was that I'd added yet another dose of laxative to it, this one fast-acting. The grand finale was coming. Before Charles could protest further, Marge's husband clinked a spoon against his glass, calling for attention. "If I could have everyone gather round," he announced. "It's time for the cake cutting." The crowd pressed forward eagerly. Charles looked around like a trapped animal, but there was nowhere to go. Social convention is a powerful force. Even with his insides in turmoil, he couldn't just bolt from his own anniversary party. The cake was wheeled out, my custom topper gleaming under the lights. Charles squinted at it, confusion replacing some of the panic on his face when he saw the single figure instead of a couple. "What's that supposed to be?" he whispered. "You'll understand soon enough," I replied, handing him the cake knife. "Shall we do this together, one last time?" He gave me a sharp look, but there was no time to question my choice of words. Cameras were raised, phones ready to record the moment. Charles plastered on a smile that looked more like a grimace and positioned the knife over the cake. "Wait," I said, my voice ringing out clearly. "Before we cut the cake, I'd like to say a few words." A murmur of approval went through the crowd. Charles's hand tightened on the knife handle, his knuckles white. "Helen, please," he muttered. "I really need to." "It won't take long, dear," I assured him, stepping up to the microphone. "Friends, family, neighbors, thank you all for coming today to celebrate what was supposed to be 45 years of marriage, love, and fidelity." The slight emphasis I put on "supposed to be" caused a ripple of confusion through the room. Charles's eyes widened. He knew in that moment that something was very wrong. "Marriage is built on trust," I continued, my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart. "On honesty, on keeping the promises we make to each other. Isn't that right, Charles?" He nodded automatically, sweat now streaming down his temples. His free hand was pressed to his stomach again, his body rigid with the effort of maintaining control. "So imagine my surprise," I said, "when I discovered that my husband of 45 years has been living a double life." A collective gasp went up from the crowd. All eyes swiveled to Charles, who had gone completely still, his face frozen in an expression of dawning horror. "Helen," he began, his voice cracking, "whatever you think you know—" "Oh, I know everything, Charles." I reached behind the cake table and pulled off the cloth covering my poster board. "I know about Elizabeth Patterson, the plastic surgeon's wife. I know about your secret bank account. I know about the one-way tickets to the Cayman Islands." The photos on the poster board were large, clear, and damning. Charles kissing Elizabeth in his car. Charles entering her Buckhead home. Charles checking into the St. Regis. There was no possibility of denial, no way to explain it away. The room erupted in shocked exclamations. Pastor Williams's jaw literally dropped. Marge clapped both hands over her mouth, and Michael, my sweet boy, stared at his father with a look of such profound disappointment that it nearly broke my heart all over again. "Dad," he said, the single word laden with hurt and betrayal. "Is this true?" Charles opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. But before he could form a response, his body betrayed him in the most dramatic way possible. A loud, unmistakable gurgle emanated from his midsection, audible even over the scandalized murmurs of the crowd. His eyes widened in panic. "Helen," he gasped, "what have you done?" I smiled sweetly. "Nothing compared to what you've done, dear." Charles made a desperate lunge for the bathroom door, but it was too late. Whatever internal war had been raging inside him reached its explosive conclusion right there in front of 40 of our closest friends and neighbors. I won't describe the specifics of what happened next. Some things, even in revenge, should remain private. But suffice it to say that Charles Montgomery experienced a humiliation far more immediate and visceral than mere exposure of his affair. In the chaos that followed, I remained calm. I thanked the shell-shocked caterers, assured the horrified community center manager that we would pay for any necessary cleaning, and gently suggested to our guests that perhaps it was time to go home. Michael stayed, of course. Once the room had cleared out, he helped me to a chair, his face still pale with shock. "Mom," he said, kneeling beside me, "why didn't you tell me? I could have, I don't know, been here for you." I patted his cheek, this grown man who would always be my baby boy. "This was something I had to handle myself, sweetheart. Some journeys can't be shared." But he gestured vaguely toward the bathroom, where the sounds of Charles's continued distress could still be heard. "Did you?" "A little something in his breakfast," I admitted. "Nothing dangerous, just effective." Michael stared at me for a long moment, then let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Remind me never to cross you." "You're a good boy," I told him. "You take after my side of the family." Eventually, Charles emerged from the bathroom, a broken man in more ways than one. His clothes were ruined, his dignity in tatters. He couldn't look any of us in the eye. "I'll call you a cab," Michael said coldly. "I don't think you should be in the car with Mom right now." Charles nodded numbly. "Helen," he began, his voice hoarse, "we need to talk about this. What you did." "What I did?" I stood up, my voice sharp as a blade. "What I did was give you exactly what you deserved. A public humiliation to match the one you were planning for me. Did you think I wouldn't find out about your little escape plan? That I'd just wake up one day to find you gone with our savings?" He had the grace to look ashamed. "It wasn't like that," he protested weakly. "I was going to leave you provided for. I wouldn't have just—" "Save it," I cut him off. "I don't want to hear your excuses. We're done, Charles. Done. I want you out of the house by tomorrow night." "Where am I supposed to go?" he asked, sounding genuinely bewildered. I looked at him, this man I'd spent my life with, and felt a strange mixture of pity and disgust. "Why don't you ask Elizabeth? I'm sure there's room in that big Buckhead house of hers, though after today's performance, she might not be so eager to take you in." Michael cleared his throat. "Cab's here, Dad." Charles hesitated, looking from me to our son and back again, as if searching for some sign of forgiveness, some crack in our united front. Finding none, he shuffled toward the door, a defeated man. As he reached the threshold, I called after him, "Charles." He turned, hope flickering briefly in his eyes. "Don't forget to take your blood pressure medication," I said. "The orange bottle in the medicine cabinet, the white pills." Even now, even after everything, some habits were hard to break. I'd been reminding him about his medication for 15 years. He nodded once and walked out, the door closing behind him with a soft click that somehow felt more final than a slam would have. Michael put his arm around my shoulders. "You okay, Mom?" I took a deep breath, feeling something shift inside me, something heavy and painful giving way to something lighter. "You know what? I think I am." 1 year has passed since the day I exposed Charles Montgomery's double life to all of Atlanta, or at least the part of it that mattered to us. 1 year since I stood in that community center, surrounded by the debris of our marriage, and felt the first real breath of freedom in decades. A lot can happen in a year. Charles moved in with Elizabeth Patterson, as expected, though I hear it didn't last. Turns out, once Dr. Patterson found out about their affair, courtesy of an anonymous package of photos delivered to his office, their perfect little romance crumbled faster than my mama's cornbread. Last I heard, Charles was renting a small apartment near the senior center where he still serves on the board. We haven't spoken since the divorce was finalized 6 months ago. The divorce itself was surprisingly civil, all things considered. Maybe Charles felt too guilty to put up much of a fight. Or maybe he was just too embarrassed to drag things out in court where the details of our anniversary party might come to light. Either way, I got the house, half his pension, and most importantly, my dignity back. Michael calls more often now. I think seeing his father's fall from grace made him realize that time with the people you love is precious and can end in ways you never expect. He's talking about moving back to Atlanta, maybe starting his own tech company here instead of working for someone else in California. I'd like that. As much as I've come to value my independence, there's something comforting about having family close by. My sister Judy stayed with me for a month after everything happened. She helped me sort through Charles's things, repainted the master bedroom a soft blue that I'd always wanted, but Charles had vetoed, and drank more than 1 bottle of wine with me on the back porch as I alternated between tears and laughter, sometimes within the same breath. "You're grieving," she told me. "Not just the man, but the life you thought you had." She was right, as older sisters often are. The neighbors were scandalized, of course. Some took Charles's side, claiming I'd humiliated him beyond what was necessary. Others, more than I expected, rallied around me. "Marge brings casseroles every Sunday, just like she did when my mother died. Betty Wilkerson made good on her promise of margaritas, and we've become unlikely friends, sharing stories of marital betrayal and subsequent liberation that would make Pastor Williams' ears burn." Speaking of Pastor Williams, he asked me to step down from the church choir. said my public actions weren't in keeping with Christian forgiveness. I found a new church across town, one led by a female pastor who preached about how Jesus stood up for the woman at the well instead of condemning her. I like it better there anyway. The hardest part wasn't the gossip or the loneliness or even sorting through 45 years of shared possessions. The hardest part was facing myself in the mirror each morning and asking, who is Helen Montgomery without Charles? Who am I when I'm not someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's neighbor? Who am I just for me? I'm still figuring that out. Some days are easier than others. I've taken up watercolor painting, something I'd always wanted to try, but never found the time for when I was busy maintaining Charles's life and home. I'm not very good at it, but that doesn't matter. What matters is the joy I feel when the colors blend on the paper, creating something that didn't exist before. I joined a walking group that meets at the park 3 mornings a week. Women my age, mostly. Some widowed, some divorced, some never married. We talk about everything and nothing as we circle the lake. Politics, grandchildren, the rising cost of healthcare, which stores have the best senior discounts. Normal, everyday concerns that have nothing to do with cheating husbands or public humiliation. Last month, I went on my first date since 1979. Nothing serious, just coffee with a gentleman from my walking group whose wife passed away 2 years ago. Harold is kind and a bit shy, with a dry sense of humor that sneaks up on you. We talked for 3 hours about books we've read and places we'd like to visit. He didn't try to hold my hand or kiss me goodbye, just smiled and said he'd enjoyed my company. I surprised myself by feeling disappointed. We've had coffee 4 more times since then. Yesterday, he did hold my hand as we walked back to our cars. His palm was warm and slightly rough, different from Charles's softer hands. Different, but nice. I'm not rushing into anything. At 68, I've learned that time moves quickly enough on its own. But it's good to know that life still holds possibilities. The money Shanice helped me track down, the funds Charles had been squirreling away for his great escape, has been put to better use. I've always wanted to see the Grand Canyon, so that's where I went for my first solo vacation. Standing at the edge of that vast, ancient chasm, I felt small in a good way. My problems, my heartbreak, my anger, all of it seemed to shrink against the backdrop of something so enduring and magnificent. I took a helicopter ride over the canyon, something the old Helen never would have dared. The new Helen, or maybe the real Helen who was there all along, laughed the whole time, exhilarated by the dips and turns and the spectacular view. I won't pretend there aren't still moments of sadness, of wondering where I went wrong, or if I could have done something differently. 45 years is a long time to share with someone. Charles wasn't all bad, and our marriage wasn't all a lie. We raised a wonderful son together. We had good years, especially in the beginning. But somewhere along the way, we lost each other. Or maybe we never really found ourselves to begin with. That's the thing about long marriages that fail. It's rarely one big mistake that ends them, but 1,000 tiny choices, day after day, year after year. The decision not to speak up when something bothers you. The choice to watch TV instead of really talking. The slow drift into parallel lives shared under one roof. Until one day, you look across the breakfast table at a stranger who happens to know how you take your coffee. I don't hate Charles anymore. That fire burned itself out somewhere between the divorce proceedings and the day I finally cleared his clothes from the closet. What remains is a sort of detached pity, and sometimes, on my more generous days, a hope that he's found some peace with himself. We all deserve that much, I think, even those who've hurt us. As for me, I've learned some things in this year of being truly on my own for the first time since I was 22 years old. I've learned that I'm stronger than I ever imagined. That friends, real friends, show themselves in times of crisis. That it's never too late to start over, to reimagine your life, to find joy in small pleasures and big adventures alike. Most importantly, I've learned that the end of one story is just the beginning of another. My marriage to Charles is over. But my life isn't. Far from it. There are still pages to be written, chapters to unfold. I survived the lie, and I found peace. If this story touched you, hit subscribe. Let's keep these real voices alive. This morning, I woke up in my blue bedroom, the one I painted to please only myself. Sunlight streamed through curtains I chose, warming my face as I stretched in a bed that now feels just the right size for one. Outside, the birds were singing in the magnolia tree, and somewhere down the street, a child was laughing. Simple sounds of a new day beginning. I made coffee, just one cup, and carried it out to the porch swing where I used to sit with Charles in the evenings. The swing still rocks the same way, the chains creaking softly in rhythm. But now it's my swing, my porch, my house, my life. That's when I realized, I'm not just surviving anymore, I'm living. Really living, maybe for the first time. And that, my friends, is the best revenge of all. Now, I want to know, where are you listening from? Leave a comment below and let me know your state. God bless each and every one of you.